Hi, this is a response for Trish, and then he's asking about driver tubes. That he has a couple EF804 tubes and was wondering if he could use it as a driver stage for the 1626 Darling amp. That's the power tube in the Darling amp. And let's have a look at it. So actually the EF804, that's a telephone can tube. It's a German development. It's a pentode, and when you look at vacuum tube, basically I would say the most of the popular vacuum tubes are both made, I would say, or were both made in both Europe and USA, but and even when they give them different names, for example, ECC 83 in Europe is the same as the 12AX7 in US, but essentially they are interchangeable. They are the same vacuum tube, and you have them everywhere. But there are some tubes where you do not find equivalents, and the EF804, I don't think this has any US equivalent, or if it has, it's not something that's in the mainstream, and it's something that I never got around to play with. I think I have a few in my stash too, but it's something like at the back of my mind. But certainly, now let's have a look at it. What does the tube datasheet say? So let's dig up, and now we have to watch a telephone can datasheet because there's no US equivalent. So now let's get us familiarized with some German nomenclature on the tube datasheet. And Heizspannung, that's the filament voltage, 6.3 volts. Heizstrom, that's the current, so it's a 6.4 volt 200 milliamp filament, so that's pretty easy, pretty light. It doesn't need much current to light up the filament, and it uses the standard 6-volt heater. And the Anodenspannung, that's the high volt, the plate voltage. So the peak plate voltage is 250 volt. So basically that's kind of typical for these small envelope, small size pentode tubes. And the screen that sits at 0 volts or should be connected to the cathode, and this is the screen maximum voltage is set as 140 volts, a grid bias -2 volts, anode current 3 milliamps. So it's like a relatively small current, low voltage pentode tube. The grid 2, which is the screen current, is 0.6 milliamp. So if we are running it in triode mode, then basically they add up, so we get about 3.5 milliamp total current. And let's just go lower than that. So there's like a schematics shown for it. And why was this tube developed? I would probably need to go into the history to find it out, but you see that we should be looking for the plate impedance to tell us more whether this can be used as a driver tube, or is it more intended as something like a high gain tube for a radio. And then here you see the RA, that's the plate resistance, and it's in the mega ohm scale, so 0.3 mega ohm to 0.2 mega ohm depending on how you use it, and that's way too high. So it means that you will have trouble using it as a driver tube, and the 6J4 that I recommended, that basically has more than 500 times lower plate impedance, so I mean plate resistance. So it means that it's much more suitable. So basically, if you use this tube in triode mode, then you get the voltage rating will be fine to use it in a Darling amp, because it can take up to 250 volts, and the screen is rated at 140 volts, so we will be using it at 110 volts on the plate in the Darling amp, so the screen can withstand it. So So we can check out those marks that the ratings are fine, so it can handle those conditions that we use in the Darling amp. And it has the same output current that we would need from the 6J4 driver that I recommended. It also uses the same 6.3 volts heater voltage, so you could use the same transformer that I recommend to use with the Darling amps. And now basically the only problem is that high plate resistance, and because of that it means that the low frequency output will be severely compromised. So actually we would be getting very little bass response compared to the 6J4 driver. And normally this tube is not really used as an input tube or a driver tube. It's much more used as a tube in lower signal levels, or actually what comes to my mind is this would be a perfect tube as the regulator, I mean as the comparator tube in a regulated power supply. And the J.C. Verdier schematics comes into my mind that he published that one of the sound practices issues back then about 20 years ago, and there I think he used the EF804, but this is very similar as an EF804 and it could be used there. So if you just do I just put in like Verdier regulated power supply, and that's just this comes up, and it just shows the outside. We don't see the schematics, but when we look at the tube component to it, then you see it has 3 tubes coming with it. There's the 5Y3, this is the rectifier tube, 6Y6, so that's the series pass tube. So this is actually a power tube that actually does the brunt of the regulation. So the regulation occurs through that tube. And the 6EJ7, that's the tube that is similar to the EF804. I would say the EF804 is a small signal pentode just like this tube, and it is higher quality than the EJ7. EJ7 would be a more universal one. The EF804 is a more specialized one, and I think apart from Germany it was not used at many places. It was famously used in a microphone preamp setting, so it's basically known as a microphone tube. So at very low signal levels it's a really fine tube, but you could also use it instead of the 6EJ7 in a regulated power supply for tube amplifiers. So Trish, as you have this magnificent little pentode, I would keep it reserved as a tube for a later project for a regulated power supply. It would be fantastic. Or if you want to build your own vacuum tube based microphone, if you want to go into recording, then it's a treasure for that purpose as well. But for the 1626, I just cannot understate the importance to use the 6J4 vacuum tube or its variants, which is the, so here you see 6J4. I just click on the first thing that comes up here, $4. It's very little money to pay. Or if we go, let's see the premium version, 8532, do they have it? $5 for the premium version. And it's not just so it will not be a big cost to go for the tube that I recommended, but for the Darling amp it's beyond critical to use the combination of this tube plus the 1626, because when you look online, people just talk about amplifiers. I want a 300B amp or a 45 amp or a 2A3 or an 845, but what you never hear from the story is that those 300B amps that sound great about 50% of the sound comes from the driver tube. The driver tube is absolutely critical to the success of the sound. And the Darling amplifier, the good thing about it is that so many people try to play around with it. So many combinations were tried, like what kind of driver tubes to go with the 1626. And by far the best combination is to use the 6J4 family or its upscale version of the CV5311. So this is the absolute top version. They don't have it. If you find the CV5311, that might be $10 each. That's the British military version. The previous one, the EF804, that's the US military version. And that's so this is the US military version. You see, it's made by RCA. When we have the 4-digit numbers, that always means US military version. So they basically built that for rockets and radios and space shuttle and stuff like that. And when you see these designation like 6J4, like number, letter, number, that was for general public use, US designation. So I hope this will help a little bit, and I really encourage everyone that if you have some weird or strange or unusual tube in your box, then use it, be creative with it, and try to find solutions for it or build an amp with it, and that's how we are going to find surprises and unlock hidden treasures. Certainly do that. But for the Darling project, I just cannot understate the absolutely beyond vital importance to use the 6J4 and 1626 combination, because that's the Darling amp. And try that. If you want later, then you can try change other tubes with it. Maybe you will even like the other combination better. I don't know. It's a possibility. But I would say that if we are trying out different driver tubes, then there's a very high chance that you are not even close to the potential of what the Darling amplifier is capable to represent. So if you build a Darling amp, and if you are not using the 6J4 family, it will not be a Darling amplifier, even though every single part you use will be the same. But I would not recommend to call that a Darling amp. You can call it well, my Darling, or actually you can call it whatever you want, but it will be representing it will have a very different voicing than a Darling amplifier. So for example, if you are you have Placido Domingo singing for you, then it's not Luciano Pavarotti anymore. You might like Placido Domingo better, but they are two quite different singers, and so are the input tubes, like the 6J4 family versus other family members. And you never know, you might strike gold and find another tube that has a synergy with the 1626 power tube. But as far as vacuum tubes go, this driver tube and the 1626 has an uncanny, unusual synergy. And this is really critical, because there's a ton of vacuum tube that's being used, and there are some magic combinations that are fantastic for synergy, like for example 6SN7 as driver or phase splitter plus the 807 pentode. That's power pentode. That's another wonderful combination like that. And there's more and more, but there's tons of tubes where we haven't yet found such a combination, and maybe you will never find one. And this is a rare chance that such a combination was found, and I really I just cannot underestimate or understate how high I recommend to use the 6J4 or its military brothers to go for the Darling amplifier. And later on you can modify it, but I would really recommend to start with it. So thank you, and for everyone, just have fun with the Darling amp and with your other projects. Bye bye.